is this. It's titled Happy Ever After. It's not about Shrek. As some of my staff have told me, every time they hear the title, they think of Shrek, and that's all they can think of. It's not about Shrek. It's not about fairy tales. It's not about princesses. It's not about marriage. It's not about that. It's not about living a fairy tale existence, but rather it's like trying to answer the question, how do we get to happy ever after? And with happy ever after, it's not being this. Happy ever after is not being this, where nothing ever goes wrong in life. It's the idea of we'll all go through seasons that are just tumultuous. We'll all go through seasons that are a real struggle. We'll also through seasons that we just despise and not enjoy. And the big question that we're wanting to look through and go through as we track through this is, how do we go through those seasons with joy in our heart, with happiness in our heart, regardless of what the circumstances are telling us? And so what we've been doing over the last couple of weeks, we've been traversing and traveling through Jesus' most harrowing times, his most difficult times, and that is obviously the lead up to the pinnacle of what today is, which is the crucifixion of Jesus. And so we started two weeks ago looking at the Last Supper and what was happening there, and then we moved to the next week, and that was him praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, and then moves forward to this. And so what we're trying to break apart with this is, what example has Jesus got that we can glean from, and how does his sacrifice actively help us? So that's what we're talking about. I'm going to pray quickly, and then we're going to launch into it. Sound good? Even if you disagree with me, it's happening anyways. And the door's locked, so you can't escape. That was, I thought, one of my better jokes, but still the same response happens. So, Father, help me with my jokes. Jesus, please increase my capacity to make people laugh. And, Father, I pray that as I communicate and as I share what I feel that you've been placing in my heart, God, I pray that it empowers us, Jesus, to take the next steps further in life, Father, to move forward where it is that you're calling us, Jesus, to move out of hurt, to move out of bitterness, to move out of offense, Jesus, and into a place where you're calling us and where you're leading us. In Jesus' name. And everybody said, amen. So one of the things that we looked at in the first week was this idea that every single one of us, regardless of whether you're old, whether you're young, whether you realize it or not, we're all got this pursuit of we all want to end happy, or we all just want to live happy. Like, no one gets up in the morning thinking, how can I be unhappy today? We all wake up in the morning thinking, and it's not necessarily the thought that goes through our head, how can I be happy today? But we all wake up in the morning wanting to be happy. We want to have joy in the day. We want to have happiness in the day. We all wake up in the morning pursuing or wanting to pursue happiness. So none of us wake up, how can I be as depressed as possible today? Or how can I have as much anxiety hit me and affect me today? How can I have the most miserable day on the planet? How can I actively work today to have the worst existence ever? None of us do that. I know some of us find ourselves in that position where that is happening, but it's not the conscious effort that we wake up, how can I make this day worse than what it already is? Every single one of us have this thing built in us that we want to pursue happiness, and however that looks. One of the quotes we looked at, or we used for that first week, was from this French mathematician and philosopher from around the 1600s. His name was Blaise Pascal. And just to paraphrase it, he went along the lines like this: all of us, every single person, whether you're male, whether you're female, whether you're young, whether you're old, we are all seeking, desiring, working towards happiness without exception. Every single one of us want to pursue it. Every single one of us want to go after it. Every single one of us want to attain it. And he goes on in the quote, and he says, this is the reason some people go to war, and this is the reason some people run away from war. And if that confuses you, what he's trying to highlight is this: people go to war because they want to be happy. Some people go to war because they want revenge of something, or they want more land, they want more money, they want more wives, or they want more slaves, they want more something. And so they're going to war for their happiness. And equally, people run away from war for the same reason. They want to be happy. In a little short time, we're going to celebrate Anzac Day. And we celebrate Anzac Day, and obviously it's a celebration of freedom. Men and women went to fight for our freedom so that we could live free, or in other words, you could translate it so that we could live in happiness. They didn't start the war, they didn't cause the war, but they met the war because they wanted to remain happy, to be happy, so we could live in happiness. Every single one of us, regardless of whether you're young, our pursuit is to want to work towards being happy. Like I said before, none of us wake up, how can I make this day the most miserable, the worst? All of our actions throughout life go towards how can I be happy. That's why you got some people love extreme sports, doing extreme things that get the heart racing, the adrenaline pumping, that look terrifying. Some people do that for their enjoyment because they want to be happy. They want to enjoy it. Then other people literally avoid that for the same reason. They want to be happy. They want to enjoy life. They don't want terror in life. Like, we're all wired differently. We see this thing starts with kids. They cry, they scream, they do all that because they want food, they want comfort, they want to be hugged, because they want to be soothed, because they want happiness, they want joy. This goes all the way through our lives. We all keep moving towards being happy. And so inbuilt, I believe, in every single one of us, in every single one of you, is this desire every day to be happy. But interesting to note is that while that's inbuilt in us, this desire to want to be happy, equally what seems to be inbuilt in us is the destruction of happiness. Other people destroy our happiness. You destroy your own happiness. Inbuilt in us is this desire to be happy, and equally so, inbuilt in us is the destruction of happiness, that we do things, say things to destroy the happiness in someone else or to destroy our own happiness. So perhaps someone's lied to you. Perhaps someone's cheated on you, they've stabbed you in the back, they've stolen from you, there's something. And so their pursuit of happiness has robbed your happiness for even just the moment in time. Inbuilt in us is this desire to be happy, but also the same thing keeps our working, is that we destroy our own happiness and other people's happiness. C.S. Lewis has this to say, if you can put it up on the slide, Will, regarding this. He says, human beings, so that's me, that's you, if you're not sure of that. Human beings, all of us, all over the earth, have this curious idea that they ought to behave in a certain way and cannot really get rid of it. So what he's trying to say is every single one of us has this idea that we should do certain things that are good. And it might look like this. We've all got the idea we should have good morals. We should use our manners. Would that be correct? That we should be polite, that we should be courteous to one another. Throughout the Western world, there'll be very, very similar things that we all have this opinion on that we should do. And throughout the world, we've got a similar opinion. And ultimately, you could probably narrow it down to this, that we should be respectful towards people. We should love people. Like, we'd all be under the opinion that we shouldn't steal from one another. We shouldn't lie to one another. We shouldn't cheat on one another. Would that be correct? We've all got this built in us. But he goes on and says, secondly, they do not, in fact, behave in that way. So he starts with the idea that every single one of us has this idea that we should behave in a certain way, but the truth is none of us do. You can drop that slide, Will. I imagine that you've experienced this, that there's certain ways that you think you should outwork life, do life, live, certain examples that you believe that you should follow, but the reality is none of us do it. The person that says, like, I only believe in telling the truth, I guarantee is told a lie. Or another thought, that we would all have this opinion that none of us should steal. Would that be correct? That we shouldn't steal from one another. Without anyone putting their hands up, who has stolen? So many of us perhaps wouldn't put our hands up for that because we'd be under the opinion, no, I've never stolen. But perhaps you've just taken a pen off someone else's desk to write something and put it in your pocket. And you've walked out with someone else's pen that does not belong to you. You've stolen something. Or you could go back to when you were a kid, when mum said you can't have any cookies from the cookie jar. But you still went to the cookie jar. You stole cookies from the cookie jar. You're stealing. Or here's another thought. Who's ever turned up late to a meeting? What have you done? You've stolen time from someone. All of us have this idea that we should behave and act a certain way, and we've all got these morals that we apparently stand with, but the reality is, as much as our morals exist, also the destruction of our morals exists, and we don't actually outwork it. The Bible calls this sin. That every single one of us struggle with this, that every single one of us live with this, that every single one of us have sin in our lives that seeks to destroy every part of us. Sin, perhaps an easy way to describe sin. It's something that we're not necessarily familiar with in modern society, in our post-Christian world. It's not a word that we use consistently, and this is a dumbed-down version of it to some degree. But sin is ultimately the failure to love God and people. Sin ultimately outworks in this is failure to want to love people, to want to love God, to do deeds that are serving them, serving people, serving God rather than self-serving. But the truth is that we generally end up serving oneself rather than serving someone else or something else. And that's what we looked at in week 1. That we all are pursuing happiness and joy, and so often that the reason that we aren't getting is because it's all about serving ourselves, and we fail to love other people. We fail to serve other people, and so we end in the place where we're not overly happy and joyful because we don't serve. Then the next week we looked at following and driving after and pursuing our own emotions. As far as I feel this way, this person has done this, or this situation has brought this emotion up in me, and so I flee away from everything in order to pursue that emotion because I think that's going to bring me joy and love and kindness and everything else. And we end up in this place of perpetual unhappy ever after because we're constantly pursuing what I think makes me feel good. And again, we're just serving oneself, never someone else. Have you noticed that generally or so often when someone makes a really tough decision to make themselves happy, it's at the expense of making someone else happy? It's at the expense of someone else's happiness, at the expense of someone else's joy. By nature, we are self-focused. Sin, with the next slide, is this. It is like an infection. Sin in our lives is like an infection, which by nature, if left untreated, it grows and affects every single area of our life. Sin in our life affects every area. Sin starts off as a little fun. It's a little drunk. It's a little porn. It's a little extension of the truth. It starts with a little pleasure. Sin is pleasurable. I'm not going to lie. It's pleasurable to sin. Sin always seems to be the fun things. And it starts with a little bit of fun, but it ends with a lot of devastation. It starts with a little bit of fun, but it ends with a lot of devastation. It's only a little drink. I'm only a little bit drunk. It only happens once a year. It only happens once a month. It only happens once a day. And it keeps growing and growing and growing. And now it affects kids. Now it affects mum. Now it affects family members. Now it affects everyone. It's only a little porn. I'm not cheating on her. It doesn't affect her. It's not a real person. It's nothing. But then she finds out and it creates devastation in her heart and everyone else's life. It starts with something small, but it keeps growing and growing. It's just a little lie. It doesn't mean anything. I'm just kind of telling a white lie because I want to admit some of that because that makes me look bad and this makes me look a little bit better. And so I do that. It's just a little bit, but then it hurts someone else, doesn't it? It infects someone else. It hurts someone else. It starts off as something small, something little, but it grows and grows and grows. Dietrich Bonhoeffer has this to say on the subject. If you don't know who Dietrich Bonhoeffer is, he was a German theologian through the reign of the Nazis who was ultimately martyred for his role in an assassination attempt. He says, the most experienced psychologist or observer of human nature knows infinitely less of the human heart than the simplest Christian who lives beneath the cross of Jesus. The greatest psychological insight, ability, and experience cannot grasp this one thing. What is sin? What is sin? Worldly wisdom, he says, knows what distress is. It knows what weakness and failure are, but it does not know, nor does it understand the godlessness of man. So what he's saying is worldly wisdom understands that man fails, that man's got weaknesses, that man is stressed, that man has distress, but it does not understand everything of it, nor why he does it, because it doesn't understand the simple fact, the godlessness of man, that we all might be pursuing happiness, but we all have actions that destroy happiness, which is the godlessness of man. And so it does not know that man, being you and I, so that's equally girls as well, not just us dudes, man is destroyed only by his sin and can be healed only by forgiveness. This is something all of us struggle with, all of us battle with is sin. It leads to the destruction of our happiness. And the reason that so many of us arrive at perpetually unhappy ever after is because the sin is invading, is infecting, is growing, is developing our lives, and we are led by that rather than by forgiveness. I love how Bonhoeffer ends. We are destroyed by sin, but we're healed only by forgiveness, which is what we celebrate at Easter time, the forgiveness of Jesus, that Jesus came and he died and he was crucified on the cross in order for our sins so they could be forgiven, so we could be set free. And ultimately, we don't arrive at happy ever after because we don't step into forgiveness nor release forgiveness. We hold things in our hearts that cause our hearts to be callous, to be bitter, to be all of that. So we're going to pick up the story from where we left off last week from Luke 22, or we're up to chapter 23. It's one of the two. We're still in Luke 22. And so Jesus is still in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's been praying, and so what he's been praying just prior to this, he's been saying, God, take this away from me. I don't want to do this. But not what I want to do. I want to do what you want to do. And so that's where we left off last week. And so from verse 45, it says this. It says, he got up from prayer. As far as Jesus got up from prayer, he went back to the disciples and found them asleep. They were drugged by grief. And he said, what business do you have sleeping? Get up, pray, so that you won't give in to temptation. No sooner were the words out of his mouth than a crowd showed up. So he's just finished saying this, then all this lynch mob basically turns up with Judas, one from the 12 at the lead. Judas, for if you're not sure, he's the guy that we looked at in week 1 that Jesus was saying, there's someone sitting here, eating here at this table that is going to betray me. Judas is one of his closest friends. He was one of the 12 disciples that had been with Jesus for the last several years, ministering with him, loving on people with him. This is Judas, one of his close friends. Judas come right up to Jesus to greet him with a kiss. And Jesus says, Judas, would you betray the Son of Man, which is Jesus, with a kiss? Arresting Jesus, they march off. So the lynch mob, they arrest Jesus. And they march off and took him into the house of the chief priests. When it was morning, the religious leaders of the people and the high priests and scholars, they all got together and all brought him before their high council, as far as this is the Jewish high council. And they asked him this question, are you the Messiah, which is, are you the liberator? They've been waiting for the last several hundred years to 1,000 years, waiting for this person, this Messiah that was going to come, that was going to liberate them, that was going to set them free from captivity, that was going to set them free from the chaos that they were living in, that was going to set them free from their sin, that was going to set them free from their shame. They've been waiting and waiting and waiting, and they're hearing rumors that this guy is the one that's going to do it. And so they're asking him, are you this person? Ultimately, they're asking him because they don't believe that he is, and they want reason to kill him. So they're asking him, are you the liberator? Are you the liberator? Are you the one that's going to set us free? And it's more a mocking sort of thing. But I think the same question that we ask of Jesus specifically comes around Easter time. Are you the liberator? Are you the person that can liberate me from my destruction? Are you the person that can liberate me from this existence that is just perpetual, unhappy ever after, over and over again? Are you the person that can liberate my heart from the pain that I'm feeling? Are you this one that can actively liberate me, set me free, release me from the bonds of sin? Are you that person? If that's something that's bouncing around your head, I'm going to give you the opportunity to respond to this message at the end. The verse goes on, or the scripture goes on. It says, he answered. As far as Jesus answers this, he says, if I said yes, you wouldn't believe me. If I asked what you meant by your question, you wouldn't answer me. So here's what I have to say. From here on, the Son of Man, being Jesus, takes his place at God's right hand, the place of power. They all said this. So this is all the court. So you admit your claim to be the Son of God. Jesus says, you're the ones that keep saying it. But they had made up their minds. Why do we need any more evidence, they said. We've all heard him as good as say it himself. And so what they're saying is, he's admitting that he's this. So then from there, they all took Jesus to Pilate. So Pilate, he's like the Roman official. He's the head honcho. He's the leader of that district. He's the man in charge. And so this is like going from the county court to the high court. And so they're taking their case as far as we've got an issue in our high court that we can't resolve. We want someone else to deal with it. Takes it to Pilate, this Roman, and they begin to bring up charges against him, being Jesus. And they said, we found this man undermining our law and order for bidding taxes to be paid to Caesar, setting himself up as Messiah King, as far as liberator, King of the Jews. And so what they're trying to say is, this person, he's a criminal. He's going against Caesar. He doesn't want anyone to pay taxes to Caesar. He doesn't want anyone to do anything for Caesar. In fact, you know what? He's a king, and he's going to he's claiming to overthrow Caesar. This guy's, he's bad. They're trying to get Pilate to want to kill him. Pilate then asked Jesus this question, is it true that you are king of the Jews? Those are your words, not mine, Jesus replied. Pilate told the high priest and the accompanying crowd, I find nothing wrong here. He seems to be harmless enough to me. But they were vehement. As far as the crowd were vehement, they were not happy with that. He's stirring up unrest among the people with his teaching, disturbing the peace everywhere, starting in Galilee and now through all Judea. He's a dangerous man. He's endangering the peace. And so now they're bringing up false charges that aren't real, that aren't got any basis to him. He's this, he's doing this, he's just disrupting the peace. He's bringing riots, he's doing all of the rest. For anyone that's read through the Gospels of Jesus will know that the opposite happened when he moved through towns, when he moved through cities, when he moved through encounters with people. He left them with peace. For those people that were stuck in sin, he didn't condemn them, he rather loved them. For those people that were struggling to find any form of favor with God in their life, he offered them forgiveness, he offered them peace, he offered them comfort. You'll know that if you read through it, that Jesus offered people the opposite of what they're saying, but they keep saying this. Then Pilate called in the high priests, rulers, and the others, and he says this, you brought this man to me as a disturber of the peace. So he's admitting, he's saying, I can understand, I hear what the charges you're bringing against him. You've brought him in here as a disturber of the peace. I've examined him in front of all of you and found there is nothing to your charge. I disagree is what he's saying. It's clear that he's done nothing wrong, let alone anything deserving death. I'm going to warn him to watch his step, and then I'm going to let him go. At that, the crowd, they went wild. They're not happy about that. They're not enjoying this. This isn't fun at all. They want him dead. And so they start chanting, kill him. Give us Barabbas. So Barabbas, he was a prisoner that was thrown in prison for riot and murder. And to understand why they're saying, give us this, it was custom at the time to release a prisoner of the people's choice. And so standing in front of all the people, Pilate has Barabbas, this rioter and murderer, and then he's got Jesus, the king, the prince of peace, standing there. And they say, we want the rioter, we want the murderer in our lives. So many of us make the same choice. So often we have the opportunity to accept, to step forward, to move forward towards Jesus. And there's always two choices. Do I move forward towards peace, towards what he's got in store for me, or do I choose to move forward towards the other way, to move towards chaos and death and destruction? So many of us keep choosing the latter, where we constantly want to move towards death and destruction and chaos, and ultimately it looks like fun. It's a little pleasure. It's a little this, it's a little that, but it grows and it grows and it grows. So many of us choose the same thing. We choose Barabbas. Pilate still wanted to let Jesus go, so he spoke up again. He's saying to them again, I find no charge in him, no charge at all. And they keep shouting, the crowd keeps shouting back to him, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him, we want him dead. He tried a third time, but for what crime? What crime? I found nothing in him deserving death. And so he's saying, this man is innocent. This man hasn't done anything wrong. This man hasn't done anything that you're accusing him of. I'm going to warn him to watch his step, and I'm going to let him go. But they kept at it. As far as the crowds kept at it, they kept shouting him down. We want him dead. We want him dead. We want him dead. A shouting mob demanding that he be crucified. And finally, they shouted him down. They shouted Pilate down. Pilate caved in and gave them what they wanted. He released Barabbas in prison for rioting and murder and gave them Jesus to do whatever it is that they wanted. From there, so they move from the high court, and then they start marching through the streets. And as they led him off, being Jesus, they made Simon, a man from Cyrene who happened to be coming in from the countryside, carry the cross behind Jesus. With two other criminals were taken along with him for execution. And to give you some idea of what would happen there, what would happen is that wherever the place where the sentencing happened, the criminals, they would walk down the streets of Jerusalem all the way to this place that we'll read about in a second called Skull Hill, and that's where they'd be executed. And as they'd walk through the streets would be lined with people. And these people would spit on them, they'd beat them, they'd hit them, they'd curse them, they'd throw verbal abuse at them, they'd throw fruit at them, they'd throw all sorts of things at them to try and disgrace them, to try and put them down, to try and humiliate them, because these were criminals, these were wicked people, these were evil people. So Jesus and Simon carrying his cross, they start walking down the streets, and all these insults are being hurled at him, all these fruit, all these everything. They're beating him, they're spitting him, they're insulting him as he's marching towards Skull Hill. And then we get to Skull Hill. When they got to the place called Skull Hill, they crucified him, along with the criminals, one on his right and the other on his left. And the process here was relatively barbaric. They'd lay the cross down on the ground, and then they would get the criminal. And so they got Jesus, and they put him on the cross. But then there's about to be torture inflicted upon him, so people would most likely be holding him there, whether by rope or by physical force. So he would have had Romans holding him down, Roman soldiers on his chest, Roman soldiers on his legs, Roman soldiers on his arms, holding him down. And then what they would do, they would grab a big nail, a spike, and they would put this nail in their hands, in their palms, or in the wrist, whichever part, depending on what theologian you listen to. And then they'll start driving it through the bone, driving it through everything, driving it through the wood to secure him. So they started that with his right hand. And then they went over and they did the same thing to his left hand. And then from there, they moved down to his feet. And they put foot on top of foot, and they start driving a spike through his feet, through his flesh, through his everything, down to secure him to the cross. And one would think generally that from there, he would just, the cross would be erected, and then it would be all over. But they chose because he was a king. Because everyone was saying he was a king. We've got to give a king a crown. And so they made out of thorns this crown to put on his head. Not because thorns represented royalty or anything of the sort, but rather crowns so that he could be mocked, that he could be shamed, that it could hurt him. And they pressed the crown down onto his forehead so that it inflicted pain. And then from there, the cross was erected up. And the sun would have been beating down on him. For anyone that's been in agony in your life, you know that thirst starts leaving you really quickly. And he would have been on the cross dying for water, wanting a drink, adrenaline going through his body. There would have been birds probably sitting on the cross waiting to peck his eyeballs out as soon as he stopped moving. There would have been crowds at the bottom hurling insults at him, cursing him, spitting at him. And I love what he does. That he's there on the cross. He's had people drive nails through his hands. He's had people bring false charges to him. He's been led through the city and people have thrown fruit at him. People have spat on him. People have beaten him. People have cursed him. He's had people hold him down. He's had people force his crown on his head. He's got people standing in front of him, screaming at him, cursing him, and all the rest. And I love what he does. And it says this. Jesus prays this prayer. He says, Father, I want you to curse them. Father, I pray that they never have another happy day in their life. Father, I pray that they are miserable for the rest of their lives. I pray that their days are dark. Everyone that said a bad word against me, everyone that's hurt me, everyone that's driven a nail in my hands, in my feet, I pray that their life from this day is miserable. I love what he prays. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. The reason we don't step into happy ever after so often is for two reasons. We don't allow forgiveness in, and we won't release forgiveness. We won't let forgiveness in, and we won't release forgiveness. We'd rather be on the cross and be bitter. Some of you have had people hurt you in whatever way that's been. Someone's cheated on you. Someone's lied to you. Someone's avoided you. Someone's done something. And what it does is it starts causing calluses in our hearts that hold us hostage to wherever it is that we're at or whatever it is that we're traveling through, and we can't move forward. And every time we think about them, we cannot be happy and we cannot be joyful, and we constantly live in this state of unhappy ever after because we won't release forgiveness. The Yankee Yale Bible terms forgiveness as this. Forgiveness is the wiping out of an offense from memory. How many of us forgive like that? The wiping out of an offense from memory. That person that cut you deeply, that person that offended you, that person that broke your heart, that person that stole from you, that person that cheated on you. How many of us can forgive like that? The wiping out of offense from memory. It's not in your mind anymore. It can only be, and it goes on, it says it can only be affected by the affronted, and that means only the person can release forgiveness that's been hurt. So if you hurt me, you can't release forgiveness for me. That's something that I have to do. Once eradicated, it says the offense no longer conditions the relationship between the offender and the one affronted, and harmony is restored between the two. I don't know about you, but I find that so extremely challenging. For the people that have hurt me, does my forgiveness completely eradicate it to where harmony is restored? Does my forgiveness completely eradicate it from memory, or do I always keep bringing it up in the back of my mind somewhere? So many of us, we don't step into happy ever after because we won't receive nor release forgiveness. Our forgiveness is always conditional. But I love what Jesus does on the cross. As the nails, as the spikes, as everything is being driven in there, he says, Father, I want you to forgive them. They don't understand what they are doing. It's this thing that we were born with called sin that keeps affecting our lives. It's like a disease that we can't get rid of, and it causes us to do things that we shouldn't do and we normally wouldn't do, and we don't understand it. And what he's saying is, these people don't understand what they're doing, but I still want you to forgive them. I still want you to forgive them. And then I love that this is what happens. By now it was noon. Jesus is still on the cross, and by now it was noon. The whole earth became dark, and the darkness was lasting 3 hours. It was a total blackout. The temple curtain, it split right down the middle, and so this is the temple where all the Jews would go to worship on the Sabbath. The temple curtain split right down the middle, and Jesus called out loudly, Father, I place my life in your hands. And then he breathed his last. Father, I place my life in your hands. I love that it starts with this. Father, forgive them. Now here's my life. Father, forgive them. Now here's my life in return. Every single one of us would have this understanding that our actions have consequences, whether they're good actions nor bad actions. There'll be consequences that come with that. The Bible says that the consequences for sin, or the punishment for sin, or the wages of sin is death. And so what Jesus is doing here on the cross is he's saying, you know what? I want you to forgive them for their sin. I want you to forgive them for everything that they're messing up. That if they receive me, that they can step into that forgiveness. So many of us don't step into happy ever after because we won't receive that forgiveness, because we won't allow that forgiveness in, because we won't release that forgiveness. And I love this thought that whatever we give to Jesus, he gives us something in return. We give our hurt to Jesus and he gives us forgiveness. We hand over to Jesus the people that have hurt us, the actions that they've done that have absolutely destroyed and ripped out our hearts and pulled that out, and he in turn gives us forgiveness. For a whole lot of us, we're allowing bitterness to lead us. We're allowing bitterness to navigate us. We're allowing bitterness to govern our lives rather than forgiveness. And the reason we keep staying in this place of perpetual unhappy ever after is because we won't allow forgiveness in. I love the example here that anything that's given to Jesus, he returns that with forgiveness. So the nails, and these are nowhere near big enough nails to hold anyone to a cross. The nails that were driven into him, ultimately what there is a representation of is my bitterness, my sin, my shame, my hurt, my disgust, my everything was nailed to Jesus, holding that on the cross so that he could give that back to God and in return give us forgiveness. I don't know what it is that you're going through. I'm going to invite the band to come back up. I don't know what it is that you're walking through, and I'm not overly interested to know if it's private specifically, but I know that Jesus does. I know for so many of us that we carry around in our hearts the hurt, the bitterness, the offense that someone else has done, or perhaps what you've done to yourself. That you've caused things that have hurt you or hurt others, that someone's done things that have hurt you and hurt others, and that you haven't let it go and you haven't dealt with it. And every time that thought comes to mind, it's the same brokenness and bitterness and anger turns back up in our hearts. And the reason being is because we've never nailed it to the cross in order for Jesus to give us something in return. Perhaps for you it's a spouse. They've hurt you deeply. They've cut you deeply. They said something, they've done something, and you're still struggling to move forward from that wound, from that hurt. My encouragement is that at Easter, we're deliberate with handing that over to Jesus so he can give us forgiveness into our hearts so that we could be set free, so that we could move forward. Perhaps it's a boss. How they've acted towards you, how they've reacted towards you, or however it is, the same thing has caused hurt, that has caused disappointment, that has caused bitterness and resentment in your life. My encouragement would be the same thing this Easter, that you are deliberate with giving that over to Jesus, nailing to the cross, and that he can offer you something in return. He can offer you forgiveness. So I'm going to pray for you in a second. But then what we're going to do, the band's going to sing another song, and it's called Death Was Arrested, ultimately going through this very thing. That Jesus came and he took our sin, he took our shame, and he nailed it to the cross so that the punishment, so that the penalty for that could be dealt with, so that we could step into forgiveness. So this is what I'd encourage you to do. There's hammers here, and there's nails here. I don't know what it is that is in your heart that keeps holding you hostage, that you need to hand over to Jesus. But my encouragement is that you come up, that you pick a nail, any nail, they're all the same, and that you nail it to the cross. This isn't an act that holds with it any form of you have to do this to be set free or anything, but rather my encouragement is that you come and you nail it to the cross with the representation. That thing that is wreaking havoc in my heart, that keeps me from reaching happy ever after, that keeps me going around and around and around in circles, I'm nailing that to the cross. I'm handing that over to Jesus, and I'm going to allow him to give back to me forgiveness. If that's you, I want to give you the opportunity to come and nail that to the cross. You don't need to declare in front of everyone what it is. Just come, pick up a nail, pick up a hammer, nail it to the cross, and just say, Jesus, I want you to take this. I want you to take this. How about you stand? I'm going to pray. Father, I don't know where everyone is, but I know that you know where everyone is, Jesus. And I pray, Holy Spirit, that you lead us and that you guide us, Father. And for those of us that are struggling, that are holding resentment, that are holding hurt, that are holding bitterness, that are holding pain, that are holding whatever it is that keeps us going around in circles, perpetuating this unhappiness, Father. I thank you for one, that you have nailed it to the cross, Jesus, and you want to take it off our hearts and you want to take it off our shoulders, Jesus, and in turn, you want to give us forgiveness. So I pray for all of us here, for those of us that are struggling with relationships that are hurting us. We are struggling with things that we have done to people that are hurting us and hurting others, Jesus. We're struggling with situations that have caused severe disappointment and bitterness to enter our hearts, Jesus. I pray that we can come, that we can nail that to your cross, and we can hand that over to you, and ultimately in turn allow you to give us forgiveness. So I pray for all of us that are struggling with that, Jesus, that need to hand that over to you, Jesus. I pray that you fill us with the boldness, with the courage to choose to step towards you and receive your forgiveness. In Jesus' name.